Good evening. This is Mike Murphy with CattleFax, and we want to welcome you to the CattleFax Trends Plus cow-calf webinar here on the January 20th version. As we look at the information today, there will be a couple things that we're going to work through here relative to making sure that everybody can hear and see visual. If you look on that left-hand column of your screen, there's a little smiley face right in the middle. And if you were to left-click on that, if you could hear us and see the screen fine, please just hit that button and then hit the raise hand button, and that'll give us the cue to go ahead and move forward with our presentation in here. As we look at things just from a presentation preview perspective, we have a few things that we want to be able to identify with today's information. Number one, just looking at what the cattle and feed grain hay market's going to look like here over the course of the next several months. We'll start the discussion really looking at it from an expansion supply perspective, looking at the cattle cycle in general. And then we're going to look at more of a look at the current value of bred females and those opportunities that will lie ahead if you've bought some females here of late or not. These presentations take a lot of effort from a lot of folks within the CattleFax team, and without the sponsorship of Elanco, we wouldn't be able to achieve and put these presentations on for all of you as listeners. So we really appreciate the sponsorship from Elanco. A little later on, you will hear from Dr. Terhar and talking about some key products relative to what Elanco has to offer. And again, we really appreciate their sponsorship. So as we start things off in here, looking at the 2016 CattleFax Outlook, and we want to start the discussion looking at commercial cow slaughter. And there's a couple things that stand out when you initially look at this slide, going all the way back in here towards 1980. And obviously what we're measuring is just millions of head of cows being harvested each year. But clearly you can see some sort of a pattern of a cattle cycle when you start to look at this chart. The important thing is here of late, when you go back and look at the last few years, we've seen where commercial cow slaughter has dropped off. And that decline in that commercial cow slaughter has led to what? And that's the first step of expansion. There's two ways to expand, either with your mama cow or retaining heifers back. And this is the driving force of seeing where the mama cows more of them are being kept home and not being sold at the barn, if you will. So we can clearly see we've had big declines in this cow slaughter number. That's driving some of the cow expansion that we're experiencing and really starting to drive what will look like the factory in the next few years of bigger numbers coming to us. Heifer standpoint, you see the same sort of environment. Very much more pronounced in the course of the last couple of years as you look at heifer slaughter as a percent of fed slaughter. We measure this obviously going back historically, but just look at the last couple of years and that big decline right on into 2015 here. And what you've been dealing with is that we've kept more heifers back to develop into cows and less of those going into the feed yard and ultimately to slaughter. The combination of these two things is what's driving the expansion phase of our industry. And you can really see that expressed when you look at the beef cow inventory here on this next illustration. A couple things just to highlight going back in here since the mid-1990s. On average, we've been in a downward spiral with that overall beef cow inventory. This was a period here going through that period of the late 90s and this previous decade and the first part of this decade, where more times than not we were experiencing some drought in lots of the central plains of the U.S. where the bulk of the cow-calf herd resides. And two things really drive our industry. Obviously, profitability drives the ability for producers to expand or contract, but Mother Nature plays an important role. And we've just came through what we would define, and Dr. Art Douglas, who does the weather forecasting for CattleFax, would define as a 20-year drought cycle. That started to break coming out of the significant drought of 2012 into 13. That drought cycle started to break in 2014 and 15. And for the most part, it's broken across all of the United States except for that very far western region. That had led to where we started to see more of a change in more cows being built. Again, whether that was more mama cows being held at home or more heifers being retained to develop into bred females. And what you find now is as we look forward, we see not only in 2015, but looking in here on January 1 of 16, when we get the inventory report that will come out at the end of the month, more of that expansionary phase taking place. And the profitability that we've experienced at the cow-calf level in the last couple of years certainly plays a huge role on this expansionary phase as well. So we're clearly now seeing the factory start to build, and they're going to be able to produce more units, if you will, and those units obviously are measured in the calf crop. In the same environment, we've seen this long-term downtrend with calf crops since the mid-1990s. You look at the 2014-15 calf crop increasing, roughly 570,000 head in those 2 years. The big increase will be this year's calf crop. We're expecting another 1 million calves to be dropped on the ground this year. And then you can see as we look in here towards 2017, further growth. Part of this concept of the factory being built is we're trying to build towards what our supply is going to look like in 2016, but even beyond. And so within that calf crop, we have to harvest those cattle at some point in time, and that's what you start to measure when you look at steer and heifer slaughter. 2015 was the big decline in steer and heifer slaughter, which has really been, again, going back to this mid-90s period, we've had big declines in that overall fed slaughter. When we look at the increases in 2016, 17, 18, we're expecting to see nearly a 2.5 million head increase in slaughter in the course of the next 3 years. Specifically for 2016, we see about a 600,000 head increase is what our forecast is at this point in time. As we start to build towards looking at ultimately our supply of what we provide or sell to the consumer, and that supply is measured on a per capita net beef supply. The way you calculate that is you take slaughter times the weight, gets you production, and then you add into your trade of both imports and then taking away the exports. From a production standpoint, slaughter is going to be up 600,000 head. We've got weights roughly even in 2016 with the 2015 number. That's something we'll watch very closely on looking in towards the second half of the year, but that's our forecast at this point in time. From a trade standpoint, this is what our forecast looks like both for imports and exports. There's a couple things that I would just say here as we start to look at our forecast. Number one, from an import perspective, the biggest reason why we have a decline, there's really two reasons. Number one, the value of what we import, which is basically the 90s lean product, that lean ground beef, if you will, that value has gone down significantly from 2014-15 and now going in here to the early part of 2016. So the incentive to bring that product into the country with our lower values is not as strong. The second thing is Australia, who's also been ravaged by drought of late, has started to see a shift, and they're starting to get better precipitation, which is going to lead them to start to try to build back their herd a little bit. By doing that, they're going to contract their supply initially, so there'll be less product for them to be able to ship into the U.S., and that's where the bulk of our imports come from, is that Australian and New Zealand region, if you will. So that's the expectation why we have an 8% decline is because of those two factors. From an export perspective, we've got it up about 3%. Couple things that we've got to monitor very closely relative to that forecast. Number one, the currency. We're sitting in here today dealing with the currency situation as we relate to the Canadian dollar, the Mexican peso, and the South Korean won, which are 3 of our 4 key trading partners for the U.S., and all those currencies have really went against us in terms of our ability to sell product into those regions. They've lost their purchasing power in some cases by 10% compared to where they would have been, say, a year ago. So everything in a sense would cost 10% more than what it did a year ago if all prices were equal. That's one factor we've got to watch very closely. Another factor is looking at the China-Hong Kong region. That's an area where not directly to China, but going into Hong Kong or even the black market through Vietnam, we've been able to move in the last few years some pretty significant volumes of product into that region. That really slowed down in 2015, mainly because of 2 reasons. One, the Chinese have really started to kind of put a squeeze on that black market and some of that smuggling of product into that region. But just as importantly, and number 2, is that their economy has slowed down. It's still an expansionary economy, but they're certainly not in that double-digit growth like they were just a few years ago. So that's another concern as we start to look at our export trade. If you had to fade this one way or the other, we would probably look to fade this to say that maybe that's a little optimistic. Maybe exports end up being closer to, say, even with a year ago versus being up 3. But as we roll all these things together and look towards our per capita net beef supply, and again, what we're taking is production plus imports, we subtract out the exports, and then we just put this on against the population here in the U.S. And what you see in here is that in 2016, as we look at our forecast, we've got a slight increase in that per capita net beef supply. Most of that associated with we're going to kill about an extra 600,000 head of fed cattle this year than we did the year prior. Looking a little bit deeper into the end of this decade, we've got a growing supply, which is just a reflection of, again, that bigger that bigger calf crop that we're expected to find in here, not only in 16, but looking forward on into 17 and 18 as well. Clearly, we've got to be able to understand what's going on with our competitors on the protein sector, the beef and the poultry. And what we're measuring in this chart is looking at total, what we define as per capita meat and poultry consumption, or total domestic protein supply that we have to consume here in the U.S., each of us individuals, if you will. And it's been well advertised with the big increase in supply that we had from 2014 into 2015. Most of that obviously led by, or all of that led by, the pork and the poultry industries. Looking into 2016, we still expect to have a little bit of a slight increase. What could change that? And it really goes back to the trade situation. Will we have the ability to be able to export more pork and poultry, or will that slow down? Our assumptions are that the pork thing will be stable and if not grow a little bit. Currencies, that purchasing power from these foreign countries will certainly play a role in that. On the poultry side, we came across, obviously as the media has reported, another avian influenza case in the state of Indiana. And the result of that is we actually had South Korea ban all fresh poultry exports from the U.S. into South Korea. Those are the types of things that are hard to forecast for as you look forward. If we were to have more of those types of cases, especially moving farther south into the broiler production region of the country, the risk is that we would get more of our trade partners to shut us off in terms of our ability to export product to them. And if in fact that was the case, there'd be more poultry that we'd have to consume here domestically, and that number would grow. So those are things to have on your watch list as we kind of go through the year. Number one, again, what's going on just with the currency situation, and then number 2, tracking this avian influenza and the potential loss of exports as well. As we start to build towards a price forecast, this is what we have to address. There's the global demand piece that we just addressed as it relates back to the beef industry, but there's also a domestic piece as well. And this measurement here is looking at the value of an 81% grind beef market, hamburger market, if you will, in relationship to a jumbo boneless, skinless breast. And what this is saying is that this left-hand axis is saying that roughly hamburger at the wholesale level is 2 to 2.2 times the value of chicken. Now, part of this relationship is built on supply, right? As we've come through in here, supplies of beef on average have declined since the mid-90s, as we talked about earlier. And if we would have shared a chart with you on the poultry production, that has grown. So by default, you're going to see some sort of a shift in that ratio just based on supply. But more recently here, in the course of the last 18 months, we've spent a lot more time outside of the range, or the trend, if you will, as you look at the values. And very recent, just here in the last few weeks, we're almost at record high levels when you look at the hamburger market relative to the boneless, skinless breast. These are the types of things that could certainly adversely impact our ability here in the U.S. to sell beef and a bigger supply of beef through the marketplace. So we have to watch this very closely. You have the same dynamic, although more recently not as extreme, but you have the same dynamic when you look at, in this example, we're looking at the top sirloin relative to the center cut pork loin. Again, going back and looking at this historically, we got way out of whack if we came through the pet virus environment there in late 14 and early 15. Part of that was supply driven. But we're also dealing with now where we're just extreme still from a long-term perspective between these two cuts. Does this limit our ability to be able to sell beef, and again, more beef this year through the marketplace? Will the consumer have as much value, or actually better value, by going to the pork and or the poultry cuts? These are the types of things that we've got to monitor very closely as it influences demand here domestically for the marketplace. Because ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to lead to what is the forecast as we look at the fed cattle market here in 2016. And as you can see here, we've got an average of about $1.33. That's what our average is for this year. It is important to remember the big decline in the market as we looked at the second half of 2015. The average market for that 6-month window was $1.36. And we had a range that was basically $1.17 to $1.45 during that window. The point being is that when it's all said and done with, we're not going to be much lower than what we've just experienced in the fed cattle sector. Now, there's a couple things that we've got to be able to take into consideration that could influence the underlying value of the market. Again, weights. We don't think weights are going to end up being bigger than last year. If for some reason we create that incentive, then there is that potential, more so in the second half of the year, but something we'll have to watch closely. Pork and poultry relationship to beef. We've talked about that. We are high priced relative to our competitors. Does that limit our opportunities? From an export standpoint, we know ultimately what's going on within the beef sector is certainly being limited because of currencies, but it also has an impact on the hide and offal. Most of all that product is sold overseas, and we've seen significant declines from where we were a year ago, roughly $4 for the value of the hide and offal, which is the equivalent of $4 to the Fed market alone. Will we find any benefit from that going forward? And then ultimately, which we know such a, half of our product, if you will, is consumed in the ground beef sector, what does that demand look like? And that goes back to that relationship that we shared with you to the value of poultry. Probably the most important concept, though, and why I left it to be last, is leverage. The relationship of what we receive at the fed cattle level versus what the packer receives at the wholesale level, or ultimately what the retail sells the product at. And leverage can swing markets significantly one way or the other. Typically, as you go through a process, as we're going to here in 2016, as we kill more cattle, we're going to have to give a little bit of that leverage back to somebody up the chain, if you will. And that is why, in many regards, we've got to lower the price a little bit in here in terms of that expectation. If for some reason we could squeeze more leverage back out of the packer, then it's a different situation, and we'll certainly have to address that as we kind of go forward. Now, looking into what the value of feeder cattle and calves are going to look like. First thing we've got to address is that we've lost a lot of money feeding cattle here in 2015. And really, when we go back and look at it in a little bit shorter window, and when it's all said and done with, when we're done with the first quarter of 2016, we'll have given all of our equity back that we made from the fourth quarter of 2013 through 2014. That's going to weigh heavily on the willingness of a cattle feeder to go out there and buy feeder cattle. And so we've got to understand that relative to the market. This is our forecast for the yearling feeder steer average in 2016, about 165. But the factors to watch, number one, I'm going to kind of go through each of these specifically, is, again, will the cattle feeder be willing, as they did coming through most of late 14 and into 15, and buy cattle that are actually a negative margin the day we buy them? If that's the case, then you feel better about the current price forecast that we've got in place. If the cattle feeder says, no, we need to go buy a $50 a head margin on the cattle the day we buy them, then you would fade price a little bit lower for an average. The basis relationship. Today we're talking about a fed market that's trading in the low 130s, and yet you got the second half of 2016 that's been trading somewhere in the upper teens to low 120s the course of the last 30 days. If for some reason we find a spot out there where those deferred futures end up being above the spot cash market, that's going to be supportive to feeder cattle. If we stay in this real strong basis environment where those deferred futures are way below the spot cash, that could be something that could weigh on the value of feeder cattle. Corn, we'll talk about corn. We don't see corn as being much of a threat when it's all said and done with. And then supply. Again, plenty of supply coming to the market when you look at bigger calf crops here and from last year and again this year. If you're in this business, obviously you know when you look at your margin situation for the winter spring, it doesn't look pretty. Looking at the values, if we're going to average somewhere right around this 165, even the summer-fall marketings for feeder cattle coming off grass, those margins are going to be challenged. Certainly are not going to be near as favorable as they have been in here in the course of the last several years. Calf values for 2016, we've got an average of $1.95. Again, we just talked about cattle feeders have lost money, are going to give all their equity back. The first half of the year, the stocker backgrounder is going to be very challenged with their margins in a negative territory. How red, how negative will those margins be? That's going to play a role right back into the value of calves. Looking into the second half of the year as a spring calving operation, as you go to market your cattle, it's important to know that the leverage that you've been able to capitalize on in this marketplace for the last several years is shifting back somebody up above you because there's more cattle coming to us. In the last 2 years, as we combine 15 and 16, we're talking about roughly 1.5 million head increase in calves that will be offered when you look at the fall of 16 in relationship to, say, the fall of 2014. So that leverage is going to work against you as a seller as calves, and you need to be able to recognize that. And that's something with that leverage is we not only look into 2016, but we look really into the end of the decade. The cattle cycle is back. We were on sabbatical, if you will, where we skipped a cycle. You look at this kind of 10-year pattern. We essentially skipped a cycle, but we're back on track at this point in time. And that means that as we go into this increasing supply, starting with bigger cow herd, bigger calf crop, ultimately bigger steer and heifer slaughter, and then bigger production and per capita supplies, the leverage works against the cow-calf operator. And the value of those calves, if you will, is going to go down just based within the cycle. But the relationship between the calf market and the fed cattle market, as we lose that leverage, is going to come back in here, likely back to more of a historical range, right? And the easy way to look at this is you go back and measure this kind of 130% to 140%. That's been more in line with what we found in here in the last 20 years. So what we're measuring here is the value of calves versus the value of fed cattle. So at 100, just to make the math simple, a 140 weight, 550 pound steer calf and a $1 fed cattle animal is at 140%, if you will. So looking forward into the end of this decade with the cattle cycle, if the risk to the fed market is going to be moving lower as we get into bigger supplies, whether it's $1, $1.10, somewhere in that area, calves have that risk back in here towards these levels based on this historical relationship. If you have something a little bit squirrely, obviously if we've looked at like 2008 where we had some squirreliness going on with corn, the 95 to 6 era, a lot of craziness going on with corn, that would be even more negative. That's going to be Mother Nature driven in here in the course of the next few years, but certainly a risk, if you will. And so thinking about just the cow-calf business and the commodity business as a whole, we've seen significant declines, and really declines back to or below the cost of production for all commodities out there. And we've got a handful of them listed in here as you look at crude oil, hogs, corn, milk. The one that hasn't gone back to those levels yet is the cattle segment. Part of that is what we shared with you earlier. We were just so tight with that relative to supply. But that is now changing in here as we go forward. So the risk is, and it's important for the cow-calf operation to understand this, the risk is that we can go back towards that cost of production here over the course of the next few years into the end of this decade. As we finalize things here, just a couple things to kind of highlight from a grain standpoint. This chart goes back with data in here since the 2004. I'm going to try to highlight as you look at the corn chart there, which is going to be that red chart. In this last year, we've spent 85 to 90% of the price between $3.50 and $4 a bushel for corn. That's the expectation in the first half of 2016. If Mother Nature cooperates, that would be the expectation in the second half of 2016, with the potential to even get a little bit lower somewhere in the second half of the year. Same thing for those grain farmers that might be listening as well. These ranges that you see in here of late for both wheat and beans, they will carry right on into the first half of the year. Mother Nature, and then globally what supplies do can influence the second half of the year prices. And then the final thing is you look at this chart here. This is hay production, which is the blue line on left axis. You've got alfalfa and other hay, which we define as grass hay, on the right axis. We're getting into bigger production. Prices are coming down. Barring something really squirrely from another Mother Nature perspective this summer, that'll continue to be the case through this year. We should find softer prices at the hay level and alfalfa level right on into the second half of 2016. With that, I'm going to turn over to Ethan Oberst for the next part of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Also, thank you for everyone who joined us. We apologize in advance for all the technological issues. we'll try to get that taken care of next. And reminder, if you missed the first half of it, first part of it, presentation will be available in whole on our website in a follow-up email. As Mike alluded to, we're going to dig a little bit into the details of the bred cow market and what kind of opportunities are available in there. Getting started here, what we're going to do to evaluate that market, we're going to use the net present value. Net present value, obviously, as the definition shows up there, calculates or estimates the sum of all incoming and outgoing cash flows over a certain period of time. And it brings that back to a present value from a money standpoint, so we can evaluate that investment versus some other investment. We're going to use our NPV that takes into consideration the bred cow purchase price, calf prices over the next several years, cash cow costs, and then market or cull cow values over the productive life of the cow. What NPV can do for us is kind of paint us a picture. Through, obviously, we have to make assumptions, estimates, predictions like we've done here. Obviously, as Mike has alluded to, some of those here going forward, in order to evaluate the current value of a bred female the way she stands in front of us today. Those assumptions that we're going to get into, obviously, for kind of keep in mind for these calculations that I'll show you in kind of the discussion, we're going to assume that cow has 7 healthy consecutive calves on your operation. That may be her first calf, that may be her third calf, but we're going to assume that's probably a young bred female that has 7 consecutive calves and takes them all the way through weaning. We're going to look at a steady to increasing cash cow costs over the next several years, over those 7 years to be exact. We're also going to look at a decreasing cull cow value. Obviously, that's not going to be a linear relationship, but that's important to look at the salvage value at the end of her productive life. The price or calf price that we use for our NPV example is a 550-pound steer price off a U.S. average. And we kind of modeled that to follow typical calf prices during an expansion phase. And the last point we're going to make here is I'm going to use a 10% discount rate. The discount rate can be looked at several different ways. The way I used it here, the way we use it here is we're going to look at it as an opportunity cost. If you're going to spend that money on a bred cow, can you spend that money on a different sort of investment, whether it's stock market, whether it's a different business, along those lines? Maybe that's even giving it to your kids or grandkids. What kind of opportunity cost is tied up with using that money on a bred cow? So starting here, assumptions. Obviously, these assumptions are used in our calculations, but also they can be used for your production, for your business planning over the next several years. You look at it from a cost standpoint here. We kind of looking at costs to be mostly steady here over the next 2 years. You look at where we are from a feedstuff standpoint, from a hay, from a pasture standpoint. Obviously, corn is involved in that. Obviously, cow-calf operators are not directly using corn, but there's correlations there. You look at it from a fuel standpoint. Oil, obviously, below $30 today. That's pretty cheap. And the way that these increases come in, if you look at where our price points are today, where we think they're going to be over the next several years, that's kind of why we have increasing costs. Pasture costs are going to increase as we increase the cow herd, and that's even considering or taking into consideration that we're in a wetter pattern on the precipitation standpoint. You look at from fuel costs. Hopefully for the economy side of things, we can get oil back above $30 sometime in the next 7 years. So this is off a percentage standpoint, and I understand that everybody has a different cow cost. Somebody in South Dakota may have a $800 cow cost, where somebody in Florida may have a $650. So that is for your reference point. Obviously, you can look at that. We have costs after really from 2017 on increasing several percentage points, and then kind of flatlining, but still increasing there. So that's where our assumptions for the cow costs are going to come into our calculations. Next, looking at cull cow values. Obviously, we all know that the beef cow herd is increasing. You look at the cull cow market here this last fall compared to 14, you can see that. That's obviously from mainly from a demand standpoint in the 90s, the lean trim price. But as we follow along in this expansion phase, we're going to see dwindling coal cow values here going forward. Obviously, there's a lot of factors that can play in on this price. Such things as drought or wetter weather. Obviously, as we get along in this expansion, how much we increase that cow herd or how many extra cows we put in that cow herd. Along the lines of, you look at imports. Australia, obviously, they've gone through herd liquidation here as they've been in a drought. If they start getting rain, that could limit our supply, and we could have these prices a little bit more supported than what they are. But we do believe the trend is going to be somewhat along these lines. We do see some weakness out in front of us from a coal cow standpoint. Taking it back to NPV or net present value standpoint, we're really only worried about this salvage value out here. And I'm not going to sit here and say that we know exactly it's going to be at $70 a hundredweight for a U.S. average, but we believe it will be somewhere in there, and it could be higher, it could be lower, but we're going to use that as you're going to use this ending price in 2021, 2022 for our models for salvage value. Moving on here, calf prices. Obviously, they're the big ticket item when it comes to evaluating the value of a cow, or what you're going to pay for a cow, or if that cow comes into a good investment. Obviously, we're going to have declining prices. As Mike alluded to, we may not be pricing it all in here. If the fed steer price on an annual average moves back closer to $1, obviously, and then we have the calf to fed spread contract back to long-term average levels, then we're probably too high on this price down here at the end of this decade, as Mike alluded to. Obviously, other factors come into play. If we have access to other markets, foreign markets, increasing exports, we could see higher values in here. And obviously, on this chart, we are using a 550-pound steer value on a U.S. average. It is going to be on the left-hand side of this chart. It is on a per head basis, and then it is on a hundredweight basis on the right side of the chart. Obviously, this is going to vary. Maybe somebody in the Northern Plains that weighs maybe a little bit heavier of a steer, heavier of a calf, this is going to change. They're going to have a higher price per head, or receive a higher price per head on their calves. And obviously, that may be a little bit lower on a hundredweight scale, but comparative to maybe a Florida cow-calf operator, where he's going to wean a little bit lighter of a calf for a little bit more higher value on a per hundredweight basis. So I do want you to take that into consideration and kind of make those adjustments when you are evaluating this data. And so what basically all that accounts to is it comes to this. And this is basically an NPV calculation. And I know there's a lot of numbers in here. I don't want you to balk at those numbers. It's everything that we just talked through. Calf prices on a per hundredweight and a per head peer. As you can see, those are the same values that we had in the chart. And you can see those are basically our cash inflows. Cash cow costs, I use the base of 650. Obviously, if you have a different base, you can adjust that and use a percentage increase that we laid out. But we do believe cash cow costs are going to increase starting in 2018 and moving on, and probably in 2017 as well. Coal cow values, obviously same here. We're really only worried about this salvage value at the end. As you can see, that's the same value right down here that's labeled salvage value. That helps us to kind of know what we can get back for that cow after her productive life is over on our ranch. So right here we have all of our cash inflows. Our expenses are right here. So that basically comes up with a net inflow, which is labeled right here. And this is where the discount rate comes in. As you can see, this present value factor, it takes into consideration that discount rate basically brings those inflows back to a present value, what that is valued to us standing here today. So what that equates to is a total present value income of $1,700, or just roughly over that. And this NPV is actually using, I apologize, I covered that up a little bit, but this NPV is actually using a $1,200 bred cow purchase price. And I know we're not buying bred cows right now at $1,200. Just as an example, I will expand that here in the next slide. That gives us a positive NPV of right at 533. And typically NPVs don't have a dollar sign in front of them, but for a little bit ease of understanding, that's where we are. So what this tells me, this NPV value tells me, is that a $1,200 bred cow today, based off our assumptions that we made above here, that this is a good investment for our money. And as you can see here on the next slide, I kind of laid out the range that we're seeing currently. And I want to caution you right off the bat here that this does not mean that a bred cow purchased today for $2,200 is going to be a bad investment. Each one of us has different cow costs. Each one of us has a different price received for our calves. Each one of us has a different set of factors that can influence this. One operation may be able to make this work, and the next operation may not be able to make a 1,600 bred cow work. And this is, I do want to, as a point of reference, this is for a bred cow bought in basically fall of 2015, first part of 2016, or right now. A bred cow purchased at $2,400 in 2014 or 2015 is going to have a very drastically different NPV value based off that you've sold one or two calves off your ranch already at a much higher price. So I just want to make sure you challenge that. And this graph, it's not to say that we can't make these cows work. It's just basically laying out the risk. You know, we do have some risk with the 1,800 bred cow purchased today, given that our assumptions come true. And I don't want this to drive people away, make people nervous about the bred cows they have, but more of a challenge. We do believe costs, and pretty strongly that costs are going to go up. And obviously we do believe strongly that cow or calf prices are going to decline through this expansion period. So it's more of a challenge, more of a heads up to the efficient operators that eliminate their costs where they can, and also increase the value of the calves where they can. We're going to make these numbers drastically different. And it's a heads up. We're transitioning into a different type of market now. And we just need to have our antennas up and be wary of that. And I also want to make this point is we're going to have some opportunities ahead of us. You know, we're going to get back down to these values on a bred animal at some point, and possibly lower. And when we do, there's going to be opportunities ahead of us. You know, every cattle cycle, you know, we go down and we come back up in price, just like the bull run that we saw really from 2009 through first half of 2015. We will experience something, you know, somewhat similar to that. Maybe not to the magnitude, but we will get back into a situation where we're in an uptrend and cattle values appreciate. And so somewhere down along the line, it may be 2 or 3 years before we realize that these cows down here will have value again, and we'll see much greener, much more positive NPV values for a larger spectrum of bred cows based off of calf price predictions. Moving on to the next chart, I wanted to touch a little bit on just bred female values in general. Obviously, as you can see here, what this graph is basically it takes the fed steer value on a per head basis and subtracts the bred cow value in the current market on a per head basis. And as you can see, there's, you know, the last 25 years, we haven't gotten below this $50 to $100 mark very often. And you can see where we are here, or have been in 2014, 2015. That's extreme. You know, you draw us out even further, and there's not very many times when we get down below zero, let alone $250. You know, that a fed steer is undervalued to a bred cow. So with that being said, this ratio will correct. It may take a few years, but as fed steer values do come down, you know, they are an overall downtrend. We're not only going to see bred cow values also have to trend with those, but also, you know, over the next several years, we're going to have to see this trend or this ratio correct back towards longer term levels, or we expect it to. So with that being said, you know, we're kind of looking at the annual average bred cow prices here. You can see what we've done since 2009 has basically been in a bull run. We have increased prices every year. Obviously, everybody knows what we did in 2014 and 2015. We expect bred female values to be lower year over year for next several years. These values may be a little bit more extreme than this, than what they're laying out here, but the trend is correct. So we just want to take that in mind as we kind of think about keeping heifers back, maybe prepare them for the breeding herd, that these bred cow heifer values are going to become cheaper moving forward. And with that being said, I would like to go ahead and introduce Dr. Brett Terhar. He's with Elanco Animal Health, and he's going to take you through some very valuable information. Dr. Terhar, are you with us? I do not hear him. Maybe he is on mute.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We're with you. The stage is all yours.
The system muted me. Hey, from all of us at Elanco, we are really happy to be sponsors of these timely webinars, and we look forward to being trusted partners day in, day out in the cattle business with all of you. So thanks, Ethan. Just a few slides here to go through as we wrap up our evening. Really wanted to talk about, as we move quickly, and some of us have already started out here in the Midwest, calving season, and just a few thoughts, Ed. When we look at cow first calf heifers, just a couple ideas that we want to keep in front of us. Body condition scores, things that affect rebreeding in these challenging times, as we've seen some of the data this evening. In challenging markets, every dollar counts. So really, we all want heavy calves in the fall, but what really drives the bus, this whole market for the cow-calf sector, is getting cows pregnant. So a couple of things that are really important is body condition scores on cows and heifers, and I just listed that 5.5 to 6, certainly 6 on the first calf heifers. I don't like to see the cows go below 5 even, because when we look at that, we start seeing some significant decreases in pregnancy rates in those animals, and it's tough to catch up if you get behind. So now's the time to look at those cows, look at where they're at, body condition score, and if you're below 5, it's time to give them some groceries so that we move them ahead, because it is really difficult to change that after they calve. When they start lactating, it's tough to move the needle, and a whole lot more expensive. Again, that has big implications on pregnancy rates later in the season. Second thing, they're looking at early intervention of calving problems, the dystocia, and rebreeding rates. Too long to offer assistance this spring, and so a lot of us, I've spent my time in practice working on a lot of ranches, and I just want to drive home the idea that a mature cow, once we hit stage 2 of calving, which would mean we start seeing feed or the water bag, the fetal membranes are out, the water bag's broken, we're officially in that second stage of the birthing process. And a cow, really those numbers average about 30 minutes. So if we haven't had significant progression and moving forward after 30 to 45 minutes in a cow, you need to look at that, give them, check and see if they need some help. Heifers, when you look at all the data on timing the calving rates in heifers, they need to have that completed within an hour after we start seeing fetal membrane. So just that early intervention has significant impact on early estrus, early in the breeding season, and calving rates. So those two are really important things. Another thing that we want to pay attention to is colostrum. for the calves that are going to be born this spring. We want that into these calves certainly within 12 hours, make sure they're up and nursing. We can have an effect on colostrum quality in calves. We can do that with vaccination. That's been going on for many years, but certainly we have some tools at Elanco that we feel are quite helpful and have a long history of being helpful to folks. A couple of the products here listed: ViroShield. There's a kill viral vaccine, 6-way viral with a Vibrio lepto, Parvovirus, can be used in the cows, safe at any stage of gestation, and really for me gets the big three: the IBR, BVD, and the lepto. This is the number one choice in the United States now for cows, and giving that prior to calving can have a positive effect on the antibodies in the colostrum and provided to the calf. Of course, Scour Boss is a product that we look to with for prevention of scours. The big advantage with this product is it has a large window of for vaccination up to 16 weeks, so it really makes it flexible. I know we're getting close to calving for some areas, for some folks, but this product allows us to provide the scour vaccine even at pred checking time in many cases, making it a whole lot more convenient, not having to run the cattle through the chute just prior to calving. Another product that we offer in our line of vaccines is Titanium. There's a modified live viral vaccine with lepto used. This one can be used more commonly in the spring prior to breeding. And again, broad spectrum coverage for IBR, BVD, and lepto. This would be something we commonly use at branding time with calves. This is a good product for the cow herd. Right now is the time for me. In a lot of ways, we look at the calves that will be coming this spring. The spring is the time to prepare for success on into the summer and the fall. So when we look at our soon coming branding time, and it's hard to think of, or maybe hard to think about that there's no air, especially when we've had below zero weather here. But when you start looking for products this spring, please keep us in mind. In an age where it's tough to find labor a lot of times on the ranches, we've spent a lot of time looking at research, and preconditioning is certainly a well-studied, and it shows big benefits where we can vaccinate the calves prior to weaning and have them more prepared. That can also be done early in the spring at turnout. So the things we do this spring can be just as effective as vaccinating calves maybe 3 to 4 weeks in the fall. So think about that in the spring as also a couple products that are in the Elanco toolbox for you this spring: Titanium 5 plus CHM. So all of our virals agents covered there: IBR, BVD, and PI3 and BRSV, plus Mannheimia hemolytica and Pastorella. A great choice for calves at turnout or at branding. Another product that we are really excited about is Nuplura. It is a Mannheimia hemolytica vaccine. It's the first ever recombinant Mannheimia hemolytica vaccine, and has done a nice job for us in the cow-calf sector with the calves. Switching gears away from vaccines a little bit, one thing that's really overlooked a lot of times is implants in calves. You know what? This is one of the most profitable things we can do from the standpoint of consistency. Implanting these calves at branding this spring easily in numerous studies translates into a upper teens of extra pounds at weaning. Anytime we can make an investment and have it as much as a 17-to-1 return, wow, it doesn't get any better than that. And so when times are going to be a little tighter, like we've seen this evening, we can't overlook those opportunities. In this chart, I'll just stick to the suckling steer calf, but component C, or implant used in calves, our studies, we see an average of 18 pounds. That translates into some real dollars when you start looking over all the calves. And what's really innovative about component C with Thailand is that there's an antibiotic pellet in that implant, and it does have a positive effect in the efficacy of the implant. On this next slide, we'll see there's a cross section here of an ear, and here's the implant in the center of the ear, and you can see a sideways view of the implant. And this would be a normal implant, and you see down here a little outline of that implant under the skin. That's when we have everything clean and things go well. But we know, and certainly all of us, many of us have been to a branding, and we see that might not be the cleanest place, even if we try. And you can see that many times we can have, here's an implant that is abscess. You see that abscess around the implant, and it's a little swollen there. These calves don't absorb the implant like we would like, and the effect of the implant can be blunted, and we like to stay away from that. So when we look at our components with Thailand implants, and here this would be some feedlot data, but the idea is the same. We see looking at percent proper implant, we can see a significant increase in a better job of implanting, and the implant does what it's supposed to do when we have a clean implant that's not abscessed. So these are all my comments for this evening. Again, I thank everybody for the time. We are really proud to be sponsors of this webinar.
Thanks, Dr. Terhar. I appreciate that. I appreciate the Lenco sponsorship. We've worked with the Lenco on this project in the last couple of years, and worked with the Lenco on a lot of different projects. And we really appreciate your guys' sponsorship and support of CattleFax. Obviously we've had some technical difficulties throughout the session here, so there's a couple of housekeeping items that we want to be able to share with you. Number one, if you have questions, we are showing you our email addresses for both myself and Ethan up on the screen at this point in time. Please just email the questions to us. That'll be easiest to be able to answer those back. I know there's several of you that are looking for some different slides and have some specific questions. Just email those directly to us and we'll get back to you. The second thing is we will be sending out the webinar, the recorded version, to everybody in here by the end of business tomorrow, if all goes well as we expect it to. So be expecting to see that. For those that got maybe cut off or didn't get on the front end, you'll be able to see that take place in here see that webinar in here in the course of the next couple of days. The third thing is as we end the session, it will pop up, a survey will actually pop up on your screen, and we really appreciate you taking time to fill out those surveys and getting back to that information back to us, because that's what really helps us create a better program for you as we kind of look forward. So again, if you have specific questions, it's mmurphy@cattlefax.com or ethan@cattlefax.com. You can also call into our office at 800-825-7525 and ask one of the ladies up that will answer the phone what our email address is as well, and they will provide those to you to be able to get those questions to you. So with that, we were going to conclude tonight's session. We do have the next webinar coming in here in the course of the end of May will be the next Trends Plus webinar. So please be looking forward to that. Again, we appreciate Elanco sponsorship, all the good information that Dr. Terhar was able to share with us, and we will look forward to meeting with all of you somewhere down the line and hopefully we can have somewhat of a prosperous, but more importantly, healthy 2016. Thank you and have a good evening.